From the city of broad shoulders, this is Chicago Unscripted with CBS News Chicago's Joe Donlon.
Hello, Happy New Year, and welcome to Season 2 of Chicago Unscripted. There's a question people ask, and the answer apparently says a lot about someone. What's your favorite movie? For me, it's Shawshank Redemption, although The Princess Bride is a close second. I don't know what that says about me. All I know is anytime I'm scrolling through the cable grid and I see Shawshank, I stop. It was actually a box office flop when it was released in 1994, but not anymore. Today, it's considered by many to be one of the greatest movies ever. Even though it didn't win any Academy Awards, Shawshank went 0 for 7. So, what movie won Best Picture that year? Forrest Gump. And I get it. Great movie, a cultural phenomenon. Tom Hanks as Forrest Gump, Michael T. Williamson as Bubba, Robin Wright as Jenny, and my guest today, Gary Sinise as Lieutenant Dan, a performance that earned him an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Gary was born on the South Side, moved as a kid to the North Shore, where shortly after he graduated high school, he co-founded the Steppenwolf Theater. We talk about those early days, how Steppenwolf came to be, his role in Forrest Gump, which changed his life and led him to do the incredible work he's doing now for veterans with the Gary Sinise Foundation. But his appreciation of the service and sacrifice of our military veterans started well before his role as Lieutenant Dan. The movie just solidified something in him that resonates with veterans to this day. We talk about that too. You can make the case that few people have done more for our service members than he has with his foundation, giving millions every year to different programs and agencies that help veterans, disabled veterans, World War II veterans, Gold Star families, first responders, and more. He's also a musician, started the Lieutenant Dan Band, which has performed around the world with the USO, entertaining troops. Gary agreed to join me for this episode of Chicago Unscripted, but he asked only one thing. He wanted to talk a bit about his son, Mac. 1 year ago, Mac died from a rare form of cancer at the age of 33. Like Gary, Mac was a musician, sat in with the Lieutenant Dan Band when the regular drummer couldn't make it. Gary's new mission is keeping Mac's memory alive. We do talk about that loss, the last year of Mac's life, which included his completion of a piece of music he wrote years ago but never finished until just before his death. A year later, Gary is still struggling with Mac's death, as you'll hear. We wrap with more of Gary's thoughts on the military, the one book about World War II we both think everyone should read, and the importance not just of our service members, in his words, the men and women who raised their hand to protect and defend us, but our role in recognizing their sacrifice. It's why he does all that he does to honor them. Here's Gary Sinise. Gary, thank you so much for the time. It's great to chat with you.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me, Joe.
So when people ask you where you're from, do you say Chicago or do you say Blue Island?
Nobody knows Blue Island, really, but everybody knows Chicago. So I always say Chicago.
What are your memories growing up there in Blue Island?
I don't have a lot of memories. I was born in Blue Island, but my parents had a little tiny house on Sangamon Street in Harvey, Illinois. Mm-hmm. And so until I was about 9 years old, that's where I lived, in Harvey. And then we moved up to Highland Park after that when I think I finished third grade in Harvey. And then I went, when we moved up to Highland Park, I started fourth grade at a little school in Highland Park.
When I order, you can appreciate this. When I order seafood in Chicago, Gary, I always ask if it's from the Cal-Sag Channel.
Oh, no. Yeah, you want to make sure it's not.
That's how you can tell if the waiter is local. They either get the joke or they don't.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize you went to Highland Park so early. I know you've talked in the past about how school wasn't necessarily your thing, but I was wondering if that was because your parents were moving or maybe you were invited not to come back.
It was a big adjustment. I remember we moved I remember I was in Harvey. I think the elementary school I went to was called Sandburg. Shortly after that, we moved up to Highland Park, and it was a big adjustment going from the south side up to the north side. Uh, but that's where I got my first guitar and started playing, and then ended up with a lot of different bands in elementary school and through junior high and high school, and got into acting at Highland Park High School, and eventually started Steppenwolf Theater right there in Highland Park.
Yeah, I can't imagine. So were you in high school when you started that? I know you and a couple of buddies decided let's start a theater. I mean, what an ambitious project for a high school, what, junior or senior?
I was just out of high school when it started. So I was there's a story in my book where I talk about how bad of a student I was. I wrote a book that came out in 2019 called Grateful American, and in it I tell the story of getting into theater in high school, and that I was a pretty bad student. And so I didn't have enough credits to graduate with my class in 1973. So I had to go back to high school for another semester to get my diploma. So I graduated in January of 74. And, once I started acting in high school, I just loved it. That's all I wanted to do. But I wasn't going to go to college. So what do you do? So I got some kids together. We all a lot of my buddies from my particular class, 73, went off to college, and I went back to high school. So after I graduated in 74, me and some other high school kids started doing plays in and around town. And because I wasn't going to go to college, but I wanted to keep doing plays, I got a job working for my dad down the city. I'd take the train in to Chicago, work for my dad during the day, make some money, and then come home and do our little theater stuff at night.
Mm.
That's how Steppenwolf Theater got started 50 years ago. This year's it was 1974 that it got started.
And you had tremendous success early. And I was interested to find too that, and I'd seen this a couple of different places, that John Malkovich was part of the early days at Steppenwolf, and you guys did Balm and Gilead and had great success with that.
Yeah, yeah. So we had done a bunch of plays, like we did 3 or 4 plays in 1974 with me and a group of high school kids, and there were two other guys. One of my buddies from high school, Jeff Perry, he went off to Illinois State University, and I started this theater, doing plays.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, and I called up Jeff, and he came back for the summer from college, and brought a buddy of his, Terry Kinney, and we all did this play called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. And that was in the summer of 1974. And then they went back to college, and we wanted to keep this Steppenwolf thing going. So they, collected a bunch of friends at Illinois State, and Malkovich was one of them, along with Maura Harris, who I ended up marrying, about 5 years later, Laurie Metcalf, and some others. And Jeff and Terry told them we had this theater up in Highland Park, and, what are you doing when you graduate? So they all graduated and came up to Highland Park, and we started doing plays in the basement of a Catholic school in Highland Park. That the Catholic school had closed down, but they had this big basement in there, and they gave it to us for nothing, and we built a theater in there, and that's where we started 50 years ago.
But this is also when you started to pay attention to veterans, and Vietnam veterans in particular. And there was a play, Tracers, that you did that I know really had an impact on you. But let's go back to your family too, because I know you have a lot of military history in your family. Your dad served, your uncle served, your grandfather served, but it wasn't until you met your wife that you took this interest in the Vietnam War.
Well, yeah, my grandfather, who lived in Blue Island, that's where my father was raised, in Blue Island, with his three brothers, or two brothers. So there were three sons. My grandfather and my grandmother all lived in Blue Island. My grandfather served in World War I. He was an ambulance driver in France during the Battle of the Argonne. A terrible, terrible battle. We lost like 26,000 during that battle, Americans. And he was bringing people back, and back from the front lines to the rear in the ambulances. And then he had three sons, and my dad was the youngest. And my dad served in the Navy during the Korean War. My uncle Jerry was the middle brother. He served in World War II. He was on a landing ship tank in the Navy. Those are ships that would carry tanks inside them, and they would pull up to the beach and then drop the plank down, and the tanks would roll out. And so he was involved with the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, and then part of the occupation force of Japan when Japan surrendered. And then my uncle Jack was a navigator on a B-17 bomber over Europe. So, all three of the brothers and my grandfather served, and my grandmother was, an Army nurse. That's where she met my grandfather. And then on my wife's side of the family, Vietnam veterans. And, because they were younger and they were just a little bit older than I was and everything when I met them, I learned a lot from them, because on my family, I don't remember my grandfather ever talking about anything regarding the war. And my dad didn't talk much about his Navy days, and my uncles didn't really talk that much. Later on in life, as I got very involved with our veterans, I spent a lot more time with my Uncle Jack, who was the navigator on the B-17. And then he started talking. Once I started paying attention and showed an interest in hearing what he had to say about his war days, he would share things up to a point with me. He was on he was going up 30 missions over Europe, and the flak was heavy and planes were going down all around him. Their plane on one occasion barely made it back over the English Channel, had to crash land. Thankfully, no one was killed in that crash, but he saw a lot of bad stuff up there. And he would get to a certain point where he was talking about it, and then he would stop. But basically the veterans on my side of the family just kept things to themselves and didn't really talk too much when I was younger about it. It was my wife's brothers who really opened my eyes to what had happened to them when they went to Vietnam, served in Vietnam, and then came home from Vietnam, and what it was like to return home. And so I learned quite a bit from them. And back in the early 80s, I wanted to kind of do something to honor our Vietnam veterans. So I started looking for a piece of material that spoke to their experiences. And I found that play that you mentioned called Tracers. It was written by a group of Vietnam veterans. It was being performed in Los Angeles. I was the artistic director. I got on an airplane, went to Los Angeles. My parents had moved out there, so I stayed there for free and went and saw that play. And it really knocked me out. And then I went back the next night and saw it again. They eventually let me do it in Chicago, and we did it we went to work on it in October of '83, and it opened, I think, February or so of '84. And it was, it got great reviews. It was very, very powerful play. I wanted to make it free for veterans on like one show a week. So Tuesday nights we called Vets Night, and the word started to spread through town that we were doing this play about Vietnam veterans. And then we would have, sold out shows of Vietnam veterans just coming and coming and coming every week to see the show. It was very, very powerful. I ended up getting involved with various Vietnam veterans groups after that in the Chicago area, and those were some of the early seeds that were planted. That eventually grew into what I'm doing now with the Gary Sinise Foundation.
Well, there you were honored by veterans for your work in that play with a plaque, and as I understand it, that plaque hangs in your Gary Sinise Foundation offices today.
Yes, yeah. That one of the things we did to prepare for the play was I contacted the VA out in North Chicago and asked if I could bring my cast to speak with some of the Vietnam veterans that were at the hospital and that were struggling with post-traumatic stress from their service in Vietnam, and if they would share some of their experiences with us. And so on a couple of occasions, I took my cast there and we would sit and just listen to these Vietnam veterans share with us some of the things that they had seen and done. And it was eye-opening and galvanizing for my cast, because they really realized at that point, who they were portraying in the play, and that that really made a huge difference. We were doing all kinds of things to get ready for the play, but going to talk to the Vietnam veterans and hearing their stories and hearing them share was very, very galvanizing. So they, when the show went up, various groups were able to come to see the show from the hospital, and they came multiple times. And so after seeing it a few times, they went back to the hospital and they made these wooden plaques that were basically an expression of their gratitude and appreciation for, telling the stories of Vietnam veterans and shedding light on what they had been through. This, again, remember, this is in the early 80s. The Vietnam Wall had just been dedicated, I think, a couple years before the show. I don't know if you remember, but, after Vietnam, Vietnam veterans just fell into the shadows and nobody wanted to talk to them or deal with them at all. And all of a sudden in the 80s, things started to change. The country recognized that we had treated our Vietnam veterans very badly and tried to make amends. And one of the things they did was, of course, build a memorial in Washington, D.C. There were parades and whatnot. But now here in Chicago, we're doing a show that 8 nights a week, 8 shows a week, we're telling the stories of Vietnam veterans, and they wanted to give us something. So there's a great picture of one of the Vietnam veterans standing with my cast right after the curtain call wasn't even over. And they jumped up out of their seats and came onto the stage and just started speaking to the audience and telling them they wanted to give us things. And so they gave a plaque to everybody. And I still have mine. It's hanging in the entrance to the Gary Sinise Foundation, because it really represents a beginning for me of where all this stuff with the foundation came from.
Let's fast forward to your audition for Platoon. You seemed like a natural. You had done Tracers. I'm sure you were hoping to get that role, but it didn't work out.
I got an agent, who wanted to represent me and whatnot. And all of a sudden there's an audition for this Vietnam play called Platoon. Well, as I said, our show of Tracers had opened probably about February of 84. And then we put Balm and Gilead up in New York just shortly after that. So I was fresh off Vietnam, going back into Balm and Gilead in New York. And all of a sudden there's this opportunity to audition for a play or a movie that's being done about Vietnam called Platoon. And there really hadn't been, any movies about. I think the Deer Hunter had come out in maybe 78.
Right.
There might have been a couple, 1 or 2, but this was about Platoon going to the jungles of Vietnam. And I really wanted to be in that. I auditioned for it. I got very close, I think. I was being considered for a part, I think. But then all of a sudden the money fell out and they weren't going to do it. This was 84. But Oliver Stone, he pulled it back together and ended up doing it. And I think 85 or 86 is when it came out. But by that point, they moved on to other people, and I was back in Chicago at that point. So no audition.
It almost seems like it's better that that didn't work out, because what it did was open the door for Forrest Gump. And I'm not saying you wouldn't have gotten Forrest Gump had you been in Platoon, but you might have maybe been seen as, okay, an actor from Platoon. I'm not sure he works. It was such a unique role in Forrest Gump. What did you think when you read that script for the first time, Gary?
They sent the script. I read it. The Vietnam veteran. I was like, this maybe, this feels right. It just feels right. I hope I get it. So I went and auditioned for it. Didn't hear anything for a while, and I thought maybe it was not going to happen. But I think about 3 weeks after I auditioned for it, I got the call that I got the part in Forrest Gump, and I felt ready for it because I had spent all that time on the Vietnam stuff already.
Sure.
But what I hadn't spent time on was the disabled part of it, the wounded guy, that no legs, and all that. So I had to do a bit of work on that.
Were you surprised at how Forrest Gump resonated with so many people, especially veterans? I mean, this was a story that really hadn't been told. The soldiers coming back from an unpopular war, and in the end, Lieutenant Dan was okay, and we hadn't really seen that on screen.
Yeah, was I surprised? Well, I remember seeing it for the first time, and everybody knew it was good. They showed it to us in a small screening before it opened, and before all the premieres, and before all our press and everything like that. They showed it to us, and we all knew it was really, really good. Tom was so good in the movie; just carried the weight of the film on his shoulders. And, Bob did such an exceptional job that we all knew the movie was good. Could you predict that it would be end up as a classic the way it did? Nobody, I don't think anybody could have predicted that, but we knew it was a really good movie. And then when it got good reviews and was a big, big hit, I guess it wasn't that big a surprise. Because we all knew it was a good movie.
Yeah.
It was just a nice icing on the cake that a lot of people thought it was good as well.
Well, and it won Picture of the Year as well.
Yeah.
Over Shawshank Redemption, which is another phenomenal movie.
Great movie. Yeah. There were a lot of good movies that year. Pulp Fiction was out that year. Remember, a lot of good stuff.
I tell people all the time, Gary, especially younger students, that serendipity sort of has a way of opening doors that you have no idea were even possible right now at this point in your life. There are things that happen to us. We're put in situations, given an opportunity, and it changes our lives. It's almost like we're meant to be there. And to me, it seems like that's exactly what the Lieutenant Dan role did for you.
Look, I don't know. Remember Lieutenant Dan talks about his destiny, and at the end of the movie, Forrest is talking about trying to analyze whether it's destiny or whatever.
Fate.
That things happen to us. Is it fate? It's hard to say. I was at the right place at the right time, I guess, to be able to come in and audition. Had I not made of Mice and Men and had a bit of a calling card, to get the attention of the producers, maybe I wouldn't have been gone in on that audition, and would have never gotten the part. You never know what's going to lead, to these important moments in our lives. But that was certainly like even when I got into acting in high school, I just happened to be standing in a hallway, and the drama teacher told me I should come and audition for West Side Story. And I did. And that changed the whole trajectory of life at that point. So you never know. Remember the feather floating around in Forrest Gump? It just happens to land over here. And if it landed over there, it could be a whole different day.
But
I was lucky
you
for
were,
sure.
and it changed your life, because from that point on, you were always Lieutenant Dan, and what a role to embrace, especially considering all the work you had done with veterans in the past and with tracers. But it really, is that what opened the door to the Gary Sinise Foundation and how you really started to help? Because you would go to hospitals to see veterans, and they all knew you.
Well, that has certainly been the case for several years now, for sure. I people ask me how I got into all the veterans work, and there's just multiple layers of things that happened to kind of drive me to the point where I would start an organization that would last this long and raise a lot of money and help a lot of people. Um, Tracers was certainly one of those seeds that were planted, and the things I did back in Chicago to kind of help some of our Vietnam veterans at that time. Minimal compared to what I'm doing now, but still important ingredients in the story. And then, all of that Vietnam stuff in the 80s leading to me playing the Vietnam veteran in Forrest Gump and having that start me working with our wounded veterans. Lieutenant Dan, of course, is a wounded veteran and a Vietnam veteran. And, over the years, I've done several things to try to help our wounded and help our Vietnam veterans. So those seeds were planted, early on and then I always talk about a real turning point. In fact, the chapter in my book about September 11th and what that particular day did to galvanize my mission and kind of send me into a new action. That the chapter is called Turning Point in the book, and because it was like the 80s and 90s were just little seeds being planted to grow into a big, much bigger action project after September 11, 2001, when we started deploying to Afghanistan and Iraq. People started getting hurt. We started having people get killed, their families losing loved ones, all these different things. Difficult time, for the troops, because if you'll recall, we went in Afghanistan in 2001. We went into Iraq in 2003. George Bush was the president. Things started getting much more difficult in Iraq during that period. The nation started to divide itself over whether we should have gone into Iraq and whether we shouldn't be there. The politics was getting really messy. And it felt very much like what happened to our Vietnam veterans when they started getting caught in between all this political infighting about how the war was going and who, all the decisions that were being made and things that weren't going right and all this stuff. And I just felt like our troops were going to get caught in the middle of all that again. It just felt very similar. So I didn't want that to happen. I'd met too many Vietnam veterans who went through difficult times, because the nation was divided over whether they should have been in Vietnam or not. And I didn't want that to happen to our Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. So I just started raising my hand for the USO and traveling and going here and there and getting involved in nonprofits that were supporting our military and veteran community, and all those things just kind of led to a full-time mission that's now just the big part of my life. And I wouldn't if you look back, I don't know that I'd have made those decisions without having done that play all those years ago in Chicago with Vietnam veterans and getting to know my wife's brothers and her sister's husband, who was a combat medic, and meeting all the Vietnam veterans I met back in the 80s, and then getting involved in Forrest Gump and having that lead to an association with the DAV, Disabled American Veterans Organization. If those, if that play and that movie hadn't happened, it's quite possible there'd be no Gary Sinise Foundation today. I don't know, but too many things had happened along the way to galvanize my thinking and wanting to take action to support the men and women who serve our country.
What has it meant to you personally, Gary, and emotionally and spiritually, I guess, for that matter, to be this force for so many others?
I just felt I needed to do something. And service, there's a great healing power in service work. And I was, brokenhearted over what had happened then, to our country. And I just felt like I needed to do something. And once I started doing it, Joe, I mean, my first USO tour, I'm seeing thousands and thousands of troops. There's a video at Gary Sinise Foundation on our YouTube channel that we put out, I think around the 20th anniversary of my first trip to Iraq. And there's footage. I mean, I had the footage from the trip. And you can see the impact that's made, by just meeting thousands of soldiers who were in the desert fighting that war, And then I wanted to go back again and again and again. And I wanted to go back because I saw that showing up, somebody like me, a celebrity in the spotlight, who, our soldiers have seen on television or on the movie screen, Lieutenant Dan and all that. I could see that was making a kind of a positive difference. They loved that I decided to get on an airplane and come all the way over there, to see them and to pat them on the back, shake their hand. And so I saw that was positive. And so as soon as I got back from that first trip, I called the USO and said, where can I go now?
Well, that's when you started the Lieutenant Dan Band, like in earnest, right? I think tell me how that all came to be, because that was after 9/11, wasn't it, that you called the USO and said, hey, I want to go play over there?
Well, it was shortly after. I had done 6 trips in 2003. These were just trips that I would go and shake hands and take pictures and sign autographs and visit with the troops, sit down with them and have lunch, to hear their stories, talk to them. They'd ask me about Lieutenant Dan or whatever. So I had done like one trip after another. I got back from that first trip and I went again the next month and the next month and the next month and the next month. Then I was back in Iraq again in the next month. So I was just nonstop at that point and didn't have a full-time acting job or anything like that. So I had the time to do it. And so after all those trips, having seen some of the folks that were on those trips do some entertaining, some actual playing and singing and music and stuff, I kept telling the USO that I had musicians that I played with. Hey, why can't I? Why don't I take it? And so eventually in 2004, early 2004, they set up a trip for me to go to Diego Garcia. It's down in the middle of the Indian Ocean. We have B-1 bombers down there, based down there. Then Singapore, and then Korea. And this was the first trip where I took the musicians, and I called it the Lieutenant Dan Band, because I figured at that point, I wasn't a big movie star or anything like that. I've been in some pretty big movies, but, it wasn't like, like a well-known name or anything. And, but Lieutenant Dan was well-known.
Sure.
So that's why I named the band after the character. And then people knew, okay, the real Lieutenant Dan is coming to see us.
Right.
And that's, my first tour was February of 2004. And we haven't stopped since. I started playing a couple of shows in 2003. And it was a pretty ragtag group of garage band musicians. We just would get together for fun. And who knows this song? And do you know that? Okay, let's play it. That kind of thing.
You had a great band together with, you brought them all together for the tribute to 30 years of Forrest Gump. The concert at the Grand Ole Opry was amazing. I watched some of that on YouTube, and you're playing all the songs from the soundtrack. You can look it up on YouTube. It's a fun listen, but you seem to have so much fun when you're on stage, especially because of the mission of the foundation.
Yeah, no question. And that was really fun. So I was back at the beginning of the Lieutenant Dan Band. Now we've played 575, 80 concerts for the troops over the years. The occasional club show, but most of it, I don't play for money. I've played all those shows for free. It's part of the mission of lifting people up and helping folks. And we fund the band through the Gary Sinise Foundation so that I can call up a military base and say, hey, can I come and lift folks up? Do you need some support? And so that's how I set these shows up. Occasionally we will have an opportunity to do something like go to play at the Grand Ole Opry, which, I've got a nice relationship with folks over there. And they've supported us here in Nashville. I lived here. We bring, some of the spouses of our fallen heroes. We bring them in and treat them to 3 or 4 days of fun here in Nashville. We've sent them all over the country, different folks. And so we'll send them to the Opry. So we have a pretty good relationship with the Opry. And when the 30th anniversary of Forrest Gump came up, I can't remember whose idea it was. I think it was theirs. Maybe I don't know. But all of a sudden it's like, hey, why don't we do the Opry celebrates 30 years of Forrest Gump, and we'll get a bunch of artists. And it was their idea to have all these different artists play songs from the soundtrack. And then Lieutenant Dan comes on at the end of the show and plays. And that was just the greatest kick. And there were it was sold out, big show. People were dressing up like Forrest Gump. And, it was a lot of fun. It was really a fun show.
Let's use that, Gary, to segue into your son, Mac, because I know he played with your band on occasion. He worked for you at the foundation. And he died earlier this year after a valiant fight against a rare form of cancer. And as a result, I know you've resurrected some of the songs that he came up with right now, and you're playing with your band.
Well, yeah. I mean, Mac he was a really talented guy. He started playing drums when he was 9 years old, and he played all the way up until, the cancer stuff started. And then the cancer fight took over, and it really disabled him. He couldn't play drums anymore. He was in a hospital bed at home. We had in-home nursing care for him. His body was crippled, but his spirit was a joy to be around. And his mom at one point just said, hey, why don't you get a harmonica? Because he was paralyzed from the chest down from the cancer, but he could still kind of lift up his arms and, hold a harmonica. So he got a harmonica, started to learn how to play. And at one point, because he'd been fighting cancer for so long, he just didn't think about music much. But then he started playing the harmonica, and he started telling me that there was a song that he'd written in college that he never finished, that he wanted to finish, a piece of music.
Was this, this is Arctic Circles?
It's called Arctic Circles. Yeah, it's at Mac Sinise YouTube. You can see the video of it. Now, this is an orchestral piece. Mac was a rock drummer and jazz drummer, but this is an orchestral piece because he loved movies, and he just wanted to write for movies. So he wrote this on piano, and he said to me he wanted to try to finish it. And this was last year, probably February of 2023. And so he went to work on it. A buddy that he'd known in college kind of came back into his life, just reached out of the blue, and he was a fellow composer. So Mac played him the music, said he was working on it, and his buddy Oliver Schnee said he would help him finish it. And so they went to work on it and went into the studio summer of 2023 and recorded this amazing orchestral piece called Arctic Circles. And as I said, he played harmonica. So I suggested, hey, there's a song called Shenandoah that, it's a great old American classic. A buddy of mine plays that on harmonica, and I gave Mac a video of it and said, why don't you learn this song? Well, Mac did. And so I suggested, as long as they were going to be in the studio, why doesn't Oliver do a string arrangement for Shenandoah and back you up playing it? So you can go to Mac Sinise YouTube and you can see Mac playing Shenandoah. You can hear Arctic Circles, among other songs that they recorded for his first record called Resurrection and Revival. It's right here behind me. Resurrection and Revival went to press the week that Mac died. But Mac designed the cover. That's a picture of my grandfather, his great grandfather in World War I. Mac designed all that. They recorded 10 songs. And then after he died, I found all this other music on his laptop that he'd written and tucked away. So I decided to produce part 2. And that's available at both are available at GarySiniseFoundation.org. Part 1 is actually available on digital. You can download it at Spotify and iTunes and all that. We'll do the same thing with part 2, but right now the vinyls are being sold at GarySiniseFoundation.org.
Well, the tribute you posted on the foundation page for Mac was just spectacular, Gary, and it was so moving. And I did watch the video of the composition of Arctic Circles. It is such a beautiful piece, to your point. It does sound like it could be a movie score. And in the video, you see Mac in his wheelchair listening to the final version. It's very emotional. You're in the background of it, wiping away tears. What did it mean to you, Gary, for Mac to be able to see that project come to fruition?
That was the greatest day. I mean, I hadn't heard the music. He was working on it with Oliver, back and forth, making notes, getting it ready. He scheduled July 17th, 2023 as the day they were going to go into the studio. And Mac picked that day because his sister was going to be in town. He wanted her to come. And so we all went into the studio, and all of a sudden the orchestra starts playing this piece. And it is so moving. The melodies are so beautiful in it that I was just like, oh my gosh, what have you been working on? And Mac is sitting there. You look at him in the video and he's following the score and he's working, he's listening. And then they would stop and Mac would give notes to Oliver or say, let's try this and try that. And they'd go back and do another take. But I was just like, Mac, this is fantastic. I can't believe it. And then we put him in front of the microphone and he played with the orchestra Shenandoah. So that day was just spectacular. I mean, and then we moved shortly after that to Nashville, and they scheduled 2 more sessions in Nashville, 1 session with my band. And so if you go to Mac Sinise YouTube, you can see my band in the studio with them. There's a video with Harry Connick is in it. And Harry was in the studio next door. And he heard we were in there and he came in, and I had met him before. So he came in and sat down, started talking to Mac about all the music and everything. and so those songs that we did in Nashville, those are all a part of Resurrection and Revival Part One. And then, as you mentioned, there are songs that my band is now doing that are on part two of the record. And one of those songs is a song that he wrote like when he was a sophomore in college, that I found the recording on his laptop. And it's this beautiful, amazing melody, a song called Angel's Theme that he wrote. And so that song is on part two. There's another, the last song he wrote was called Quasi Love. And that's a rock song. And you can see that song on Mac Sinise YouTube. I brought out, there are members of my band that are playing on that, and there are members of bands that Mac played in when he was a young guy. I brought them all out, his buddies from USC that were drummer pals in the music program. I brought them all out, and they all play on this last song that Mac wrote. It's really, really very beautiful.
Well, I saw him in the wheelchair and I couldn't help but think of you in the wheelchair in the movie and all of the veterans you've seen in wheelchairs over the years, and all of that, to your point, that have been so banged up, and the pain and there's just so much you've seen, Gary, and I just can't even imagine it preparing you for what you had to go through with Mac. And I'll tell you too, in preparation for the interview, I listened to your podcast with Mac, and it was so powerful and touching to hear the two of you sharing an hour-long conversation. It was just powerful.
Thank you, Joe. That I am so, blessed that we have that. That conversation between Mac and I on tape. It's on the Gary Sinise Foundation website, GarySiniseFoundation.org, on our podcast page. The podcast he started, and we have resurrected and revived the podcast in honor of Mac, with Kristen Barter, who, when Mac worked at the foundation, he worked with Kristen at the foundation, and they were great pals, and she's carrying on, for Mac and doing a beautiful job.
Mac asked you something in that conversation that I wrote down because it struck me. He said one of the themes of the foundation includes a quote from Calvin Coolidge: "A nation that forgets its defenders will itself be forgotten." What does that quote mean to you, Gary?
Yes, I lived by that. I mean, where would we be without men and women who wanted to raise their hand to protect and defend us? Where would we be as a nation? We would have to draft people, and and quite often when that happens, you have people that just really it's not a place for them.
Yeah,
there are certain people that are, they're many follow in their family footsteps. It's like a family business. My grandfather served, my uncle served, my brother served, my dad served. I'm serving. Same thing with firefighters. You meet firefighters who, it's been in the family for years, and they just follow and in those footsteps. We're lucky that we have people that are willing to do that kind of thing. And if we forget them, if we don't honor them, if we don't support them, give back to them, and let them know that we're at least grateful that they're out there doing the heavy lifting to keep us safe and free, we're not going to have a country.
Yeah. I think about the idea of having a draft today. Can you imagine that? I mean, I can't. And what I do is look back, like you, because of your family history, at what's happened to veterans, and going back to your grandfather in World War I, and all the books I've read on World War II. I think it's so important to keep their legacy alive. And one of my favorite books is Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand, the Louis Zamperini story. I think that should be required reading for every high school student. I mean, it's just such an amazing story about everything from selfless sacrifice to the common cause for the greater good, and not just for the greater good of our country, but for the world.
That's an amazing, amazing story. Laura is a friend of mine. years ago. Laura is a great writer, and that's a great book on Unbroken. Years ago, Laura and I started a program called Operation Iraqi Children back in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
We started shipping school supplies over to the troops. During that period of time, I mean, that program was up and running for 10 years, almost 10 years, and it ran a long time, from 2004 to about 2013 or so. And we shipped hundreds of thousands of school supplies over to the troops, and they take them out and give them to the kids in these war-torn areas that they're serving in. It was shortly after that, I think, that Laura went to work on Unbroken, and that Lou Zamperini story is an amazing story. Made into a movie. Angelina Jolie.
did, yeah. I didn't see the movie. I didn't need to. The book was so amazing that I was good with that. And I nothing against the movie, but the book moved me in such a way I can't say enough about how. Again, I think it should be required reading for every high school student, just for the appreciation of what that generation did.
It's incredible. One of our great programs at the Gary Sinise Foundation is called Soaring Valor.
Yeah.
We've taken hundreds and hundreds of World War II veterans on charter airplanes down to the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. And I did 15 of these trips. We've done nearly 30. I think we've done 27 trips now where we've taken hundreds of veterans down to the National World War II Museum. And traveling with these great American heroes like Lou Zamperini,
Mm-hmm.
who survived just unbelievable things, had an amazing life. You'll be traveling with 30 World War II veterans, and every one of them has an amazing story. And these are the people that saved the world from tyranny. And when you read Lou's story, where do you get that kind of resilience? And he went through his own post-traumatic stress and really, really difficult stuff.
Mm.
But I mean, it is an amazing story, and he's one great American. I actually met Lou. We both received the Ellis Island Medal of Honor in 2008 at Ellis Island, and I happened to be lucky enough to sit next to Lou Zamperini, who was getting the medal as well. I have a great picture that somebody, I don't know who took the picture, but I'm so glad they did, because it's me and Lou sitting next to each other, with our medals, and it's pretty special.
Yeah. I think about World War II, Gary, and the magnitude of what happened with, Germany charging across Europe. I struggle to put that into perspective today. I mean, the idea of that happening, and we were late to the game, as we all know, and has been brilliantly documented by a number of movies. But can you imagine that happening, something like that again today? It's horrifying.
Horrifying, yes. What is heartening about it is that the nation came together in a way to fight this tyranny. There were only two choices at that time: either win or lose. I mean, it's like fight or die. The tyranny was on the march around the world, and the Allies had to come together to defeat it. Thankfully, the men and women who we take on these trips to the National World War II Museum, thankfully they won that war, and we're all lucky for it, because we'd all be living in a much different world.
Right.
Just imagine if we had not defeated Nazi Germany, or imperialist Japan at that time, or fascist Italy. I mean, just imagine. The world would be a much different place for all of us. So God bless them for having done what they did. Like I said, I've had the opportunity to travel with hundreds of World War II veterans. I had World War II veterans in my family. I'm a grateful American for them.
Yeah. This is the first time you and I have talked, Gary, and I think I know how you're going to answer this, but you've done so much in your life, and much of it dedicated to others. But what would you say you're the most proud of? My
family, my kids, and I've been married to my wife since 1981. We've been together since 1976. 3 beautiful children that we're so blessed to have. Our daughters were very close to their brother, and we all pulled together when we had to face this cancer. We actually, my wife was diagnosed with cancer just 2 months before our son was. And so that was the summer of 2018 was a difficult time. And we've had to really pull together as a family and to help each other through. But I'm so proud of Mac and who he was and, what he taught us about grace under fire. And very proud of my daughters and have beautiful grandkids. And, and then I'm blessed, to have had a great career. And this country has given me great opportunities to succeed. And that's what we all have in the United States of America, is this opportunity to make the most of the freedom that we have. And we're blessed that we have freedom providers that are willing to go out there and do the heavy lifting for the rest of us. So I feel blessed in a lot of ways.
Well, you've been very kind with your time, Gary, and there's no way I can add to all that's been said about what you've done for, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people, I would imagine, right? Maybe even millions when you extend the reach to all the work that your foundation has done. And I was thinking about the other day before our conversation, how, most of us are just struggling to get through it, right? Trying to get through the day. What do I have to do today? But for you, it's what do I have to do today for others? And you're right. What a blessing that is.
Well, I've been fortunate, in many ways. And I met incredible people along the way, Joe, just inspiring, amazing people that have motivated me. I've had a great team of people around me to help me with the mission and to carry it on. And we couldn't be operating at the level that we're operating with all the different programs that we're doing at the Gary Sinise Foundation without a great team of people to execute on the mission. And then thousands and thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of generous Americans who go to our foundation website and donate so that we can pass on their generosity to other people. So I feel like I'm a kind of a conduit. I'm just a little bridge between our fellow Americans who want to do something positive for the men and women who serve, and those who are out there serving each and every day, or who have served, our country. I get to pass on the goodness of the American people to them, and they deserve it.
Last question. How often do you get back to Chicago? And when you do, what's the first thing you like to do when you get here?
If I'm there in the spring, summer, or early fall, it's Wrigley.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a lifelong Cub fan. Again, I have Steppenwolf Theater is there. I've been there 50 years now. I love going to Gibson's.
Yeah. Get a steak.
Yeah, love going to Gibson's and
maybe some of that Cal Sag fish you can order from Gibson's too.
Oh yes, I'll look forward to that next time.
Hey Gary, thank you so much for the time again. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it, Joe. Thanks for having me.
My thanks to Gary for joining me. After our conversation, he was getting ready for the Snowball Express. His foundation takes almost 2,000 Gold Star children and spouses from the families of fallen heroes to Disney World every year. They fly charter planes to Florida from all over the country and take over a hotel. His good work never seems to end. If you're interested in hearing more of Mac's music, both albums Gary mentioned are now available on vinyl. Check out GarySiniseFoundation.org. And all the proceeds, of course, go to the foundation. My thanks to Brian Briggs with Brian Briggs Productions. He provides all the editing and post-production work. Ellie Coder produces our social media content. Chicago vibraphonist Thaddeus Tukes cooked up the original soundtrack. Thanks as well to the voice off the top, the one and only Bill Curtis. And as always, I thank you for listening to Chicago Unscripted.